So here's my setup for foundation paper piecing. You can see I've got my ruler, my little seam roller, presser, rotary cutter. I've got an add a quarter ruler that I like to use as well, and I'll show you a couple ways I use that. So first we'll take one of the templates facing up with the printed side facing up, and then a straight edge. I love this add a quarter ruler plus because it's got the beveled edge, which helps you make really nice crisp folds. So what we're doing is basically just taking the paper and pre-creasing along each of the lines, and you're folding the printed edge towards itself. Now, if you don't have an add a quarter ruler, that's fine. You can use a traditional ruler and just crease along the printed line. And this is not a required step, of course, but I do find it makes things a lot easier down the road in the process. So it's one of those things that I just like to take a couple minutes to do before I get started. Now that my template is all pre-creased, it's time to start sewing. So first we'll take a B1 piece, that's the smallest white rectangle that we have cut, and we'll turn the template face down and the fabric face up and put them together so that one of the long edges of your B1 piece goes past that line between segments 1 and 2 by a 1/4 inch. And here you can see why pre-creasing the paper comes in handy. So I've got about a 1/4 inch there. I'm going to make sure that that white piece is in place, and then I'm just going to use a pin to secure it. Now, once you get going, you won't need to pin every piece. It's just helpful to get that first one in place. Now we'll turn the template back face down. I will take a C1 piece and I'm going to turn it face down, right side down, and place it over top of my B1 piece, lining up those long edges. And for this first piece, sort of centered lengthwise. So here, I'm going to take my whole stack over to my sewing machine. Try not to let anything shift. And then I'm going to stitch along that line between segments 1 and 2 through the paper and both layers of fabric. You'll want to backstitch at the beginning and the end of this sewing line, so that way it doesn't come apart once it's time to remove the papers. So I've shortened my stitch length here, and then we backstitch at the beginning and the end, and you're sewing from the edge of the outer rectangle at the top to the edge of the outer rectangle on the side. Then we go back over to the cutting board, we open that out, look at that nice, lovely, sharp line, and here's where you'll finger press or maybe use your little rolly thing. If you'd like to use an iron, you can. I love having an excuse to not need to use my iron. So just get that pressed open nice and crisp, flip it again. So templates face up, and now I'm going to be looking at the line between segments 2 and 3. So fold back along that handily pre-creased line, thanks past me. And then we want to make sure that we have a 1/4 inch pretty exactly. So I'm going to use my clear ruler. I'm going to find a 1/4 inch past the creased edge of that line segment there. And then I'll use my rotary cutter, making sure my fingers are out of the way, and just slice off any excess. Move that out of the way. Then we turn it fabric side up, printed side down. I get my next piece of fabric, which is going to be a B2 strip. I'm going to take it and place it right side down on top of the right side up previous piece. I'm going to line up those long edges, hold it together, flip it over, take it to my machine, and now I'm going to stitch along the line between segments 2 and 3. And again, I'm going to start stitching in that overall block seam allowance, so sort of the space between the two rectangles. You stitch end to end, back stitching at the beginning and the end. Pop it out, bring it back over to the cutting board, and do the same thing. So we're going to open out that nice crisp seam, finger press it, or roll it out a little bit just to get it nice and flat. Then I'll flip the whole thing over. And it's good just to double check and make sure that my fabric strips are going to go all the way to or past that outer rectangle. Looks like I'm in good shape. So next, we're going to fold back on the pre-creased line between segments 3 and 4. I'm going to take my clear ruler and scooch it over so that I've got a 1/4 inch of fabric extending past the crease line. Now, if you have got a handy add a 1/4 ruler, it's got a nice little lip on it, so you can just nudge it up against your crease and it's good to go. Trim off the excess fabric, scooch it off to the side, and then we're ready to go. And then you just repeat with the next piece. So this is a C2 piece. I'm going to put it right side down on top of the previous right side up piece. Line up those long edges. I'm going to hold the whole stack together, bring it over to the machine, drop the needle at that outer rectangle, back stitch at the beginning, stitch all the way across the line between segments 3 and 4, go all the way to that outer rectangle, back stitch, bring it back over, unfold, press out that nice crisp line, flip it over, fold back along the next line, making sure you're right on that printed line as you fold back. And then I'm going to use my add a 1/4 ruler here to get that extra 1/4 inch beyond the crease, cut off the excess, and now we're ready for the next piece. So I'm just going to kind of speed up through the rest here with just a couple things to point out. Of course, back stitching at the beginning and end of each seam. There you can see I've just double checked to make sure that my pieces are still lined up, that they haven't shifted. I have had a couple of sad occasions where things get folded underneath, so taking that moment just to double check, especially on the longer strips, can be something that pays off in the long run and not having to undo a seam. Now when I get to this very last piece of the striped bar, and I'm working with a smaller piece and sort of a particular target, I'm going to have that little triangle to cover at the very end. I do like to, again, take a moment just to make sure it's going to line up nicely. So what I'm doing here is sort of peeking through, figuring out where the midpoint of that triangle is, or where the point is, and lining that up with the center of my little white piece. And we open it all up, give it the little press. And there we go. Now to trim the whole block. So we're going to trim along the outer rectangle line there. The space between the inner rectangle and the outer rectangle is your 1/4 inch seam allowance for when you piece it with the other solid black blocks. I do recommend you have a particular rotary cutter that you only use for FPP because the paper will eventually dull your blade. So I go all the way around, trimming all 4 sides to that outer rectangle. This is going to measure 3.5 by 10.5 when you're done. And then you can flip it over and be amazed at those lovely crisp lines. Now, I did notice here I've got a little spot where I don't have coverage over my pieces. I'm okay with that because it's going to land in the seam allowance. I know I can work with it. However, on subsequent bar blocks, I'm going to make sure that I sort of scooch each little strip a little further over to the left so that I don't have that on future blocks.